Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey Podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey Podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoltmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoltmeister, and I have with us the Tom Olson, and we are here for yet another podcast.
Yes, and we have the Jared Stoltmeister here, just so everybody knows.
It's true. I'm getting to that point where I can begin to...
I like your jacket.
Thank you.
That's
you should
I have
recognize
one
this.
just like it.
He does.
It's really cool.
So Tom coaches
Maybe we should
my
start
sons.
matching when we come in this.
I think the folks would like that.
Yes. Maybe we could sing a song.
Okay.
No, maybe not.
Yeah, Tom coaches my son's golf team.
Oh, yeah. And they're
So-
just tearing it up.
Yeah.
The grass, that is.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm representing wearing the gear that, and so Tom has one and the boys have one, so it's pretty cool.
Yes, we've been having fun.
Yeah,
Getting out there.
They're improving, and so
My golf game is improving. I'm not sure if theirs is.
Sure, that's coaching.
Yeah, whoever coaches does the learning. Yeah, there you go. You know,
There you go.
I've noticed that this year.
Okay, that's why guys in their 70s are tearing up the NBA.
That's right.
Okay, all
Wait
right,
a minute.
fair
That's
enough.
I don't think it. I think there's
There's
something different there going on, but there are some older guys that are good at golf, so it's still different with golf than it is for basketball.
That's
and football.
fair.
Yeah, it's not as physical of a sport.
It's true. Tom got me there. So we're back. We've had a little bit of
And we're talking
weeks.
sports today.
Hey,
I guess not.
that's my thing.
We
I
probably
like
should
sports.
talk about active turnkey or turnkeys or something to do with rental markets today. You think?
And we are.
Okay.
So we have another interesting podcast, I think, and I think you'll like
We
this.
are
So-
prepared for this.
Yeah.
Trust me, folks.
Sure.
We actually did. We did take a couple minutes and prepare for this.
A few minutes. And so
Hours studying. We were up reading articles,
Sure.
and we're bringing it. We're bringing it today for the Active Turnkey Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We do appreciate everybody listening. We love to give a little bit of humor, and we know we're not quitting our day job quite yet. We're really close. We're on the verge of something great, I think, with our entertainment here at the Active Turnkey Podcast. But sometimes when you listen to podcasts, you have to laugh a little bit. You don't just want to hear statistics. You don't just want to hear like all these things I should be doing. You want to have a little bit of fun. So that's we try to bring it. We rehearse all of this banter and we practice in the mirror. I'm
As I
just
said.
totally kidding. We don't.
I do that. But again, we talked about that in a previous podcast. You can go back and listen to that. But Tom's right. So a couple weeks ago, actually, we did a podcast and we referenced an article on Bigger Pockets about the 6 unicorn cities.
Oh yeah.
And so we got some good feedback.
Some
on
people
that.
believe that there are actual unicorns out there. I think
Wait, that was part
there's
of the
a girl that
feedback.
works for us, I think, that believes there are still unicorns.
Yeah.
Just don't tell her that
yeah.
they don't really exist.
There's that. So,
But unicorn markets, yes, and we are in one of those unicorn markets
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah, and
But
got
we're not
really
talking
good-
about unicorn markets today.
No, I mean we got good feedback on the article itself and kind of like the commentary on the article, and so we're actually going to do that again today. So there's another article that was posted this week we'll reference, but today's topic is why our 2021 hot market will drive demand for turnkey rentals.
Really? So you would think, I mean, it's kind of interesting because this market is like really crazy.
It's hot.
It is like
Smoking hot.
I mean, I just listed a property this week, and we listed it $10,000 higher than what I thought we should list it for. And we had an offer like a couple $1,000s over list price in like a day. And it's kind of funny because like at the same time that's happening, there's a lot of other things in real estate that are being affected by the hot real estate market, and there's other underlying factors. And I think this person did a really good job. And it was actually written very recently. Here, it's May 4th, and written. And the topic or the heading is the home sales boom means you might end up renting. So this article talks about, hey, since there's a boom right now, it might mean that you as the consumer, you as the person reading this article may end up renting. But we're going to kind of twist it a little bit different. And to me, like the way I look at it is, hey, if that means there's going to be more people out there renting, well, then what's that going to do for the actual landlords that own the rentals, that decide that now is the time to buy rentals, or now is the time to hold on to those rentals?
And there's a lot of different quotes and statements that he makes that are things that you'll hear on your other podcasts, you'll read on Bigger Pockets, all these different things about what real estate is doing, or a few years ago what it was supposed to do. And so we'll reference a few of those things. But again, this podcast will be a little bit more of a commentary on that part. And of course, some of the information is going to be nationwide, but we'll also give a little bit of feedback from what's happening here in our local market, which again is different. So Tom, he's talking about a boom. What is a boom, and how would you compare it to what, this writer, it looks like he's got a picture of San Francisco on the main screen.
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco is not a place I would want to live personally, but it does look like San Francisco. I'm not sure if that's San Francisco or not, but the author is Ronnie Mola, I think it is. Ronnie Mola, and again, this is from, if you guys want to go read the article, it's from Vox.com, and it was on May 4th. So if you guys want to read this article, that'd be great. But it basically talks about somebody who listed their property, and then they sold their property super fast, and then it means they needed to start renting because they couldn't go find another property that they either wanted, or they thought that since the prices went up so much that maybe this wouldn't be a good time to buy, right? So, and even references in here, which I thought was really a good statistic, and I didn't even realize it was this high. But in March of 2019, the median home price for a single-family home was $261,000. And in March of 2021, the median home price was $335,000. So, that goes to tell you, I mean, that kind of starts changing things.
Sure.
The article also references that, it used to only be that people in low-income areas would be renters, and that part is kind of changing. There's people that want to rent in all neighborhoods and all classes, really. I mean, even all the way up to $1 million houses, there are people that are wanting to rent. Now, as a landlord, the way I look at this, Jared, is there does come a point between where the price point of a rental and the price point of a house sale makes me make the decision whether or not I might want to rent or I might want to sell. And, for years and for decades, I would say that price point probably was between $80,000 and maybe $120,000, $130,000, maybe a little bit more, $150,000, or so somewhere in there would be that line in which it made more sense where if I bought a house for, say, $150,000, whether or not it makes sense for me to take on that mortgage, or whether it makes more sense financially, at least, to rent that same property, right? And what's really interesting is, and this article kind of talks about it, but I've experienced this in my own life, and I've even heard people get up and say you should be a renter, and I'm like, oh boy, why would you ever want to be a renter? I've never been a renter, so I don't really know, but I've always lived in areas in which it's cheaper for me to buy the house, and my monthly payment after taxes and insurance and everything and principal and mortgage is cheaper than it is for me to rent the same property. So I think for us, I think that's point number one of this whole podcast really is to say, hey, if I'm a landlord and I want to go out and rent properties, this is my opinion. And I know that there's other people out there that focus on the super high-end rentals, $500,000, $600,000 rentals, and their whole play is really the appreciation play. Their play isn't necessarily the play of the cash flow. But to me, I feel like you can't have cash flow in those markets because your mortgage payment's going to be $3,200, $3,400. You're going to be able to rent those places for maybe $2,200, $2,800, or maybe break even. And then when a repair comes, well, the repairs are way more expensive in those types of houses than they are in the lower end houses. So for me, I like those. I think that what's happened with low interest rates is it's actually bumped up that range. So right now you could buy a $200,000 house, and it's cheaper to buy a $200,000 house now than it is to rent a $200,000 house. $200,000 house right now is going to rent between $1,500 and $1,600. That'd be my guess in our market, and in other other markets that I know is probably could even be as high as $1,800, maybe as low as $1,300, but probably not much lower than $1,300. Probably $1,400 to $1,600 is going to be the average. But that same mortgage payment is going to be $1,000 after taxes and insurance. So, I mean, those are some of the key points that I look at. So I think what's happened with lower interest rates is it's allowed us to go into where it's okay to pay a little bit more for a rental. We can't just be stuck on this 120 number that we were kind of stuck on for turnkey rentals in the future. And it makes some more sense now to own those $150, $180, $200,000 properties that are renting for, say, $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, $1,800, because we know that our mortgage payment on those $200,000 houses are now, you know, $1,000, and we can make $500,000, maybe $500 a month in cash flow, you know, splitting the difference between those two payments. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now you're saying when you're talking about the difference of having, you know, used illustration of a $150,000 house, are you saying specifically on the acquisition? Because I think in some cases we could see if I own a house that's $150,000, it's worth that much. You know, it might be a little bit different. Are you thinking on the acquisition end?
Yeah. So if I'm buying a turnkey rental right now myself personally, I'm looking at this like, you know, 5 years ago, I would never probably buy a turnkey rental over 120. That was kind of like a threshold. To me, like most properties I saw at 150 at that point, like really weren't giving me, I could get the same cash flow out of a $120,000 house as I could from a $150,000 house, and it really didn't make sense to me. You know, so now, but all I'm saying is like now with interest rates lower, you have to understand when I've gotten the housing market, when I first bought my first house, interest rates were 7.75%, and they were the cheapest they've been in 20 years. So at that point, when you're paying 7% interest rate, you know, that's what's really changed some of the dynamics, I believe, when it comes to where does it make sense to be a renter, where does it make sense to be a homeowner. And I know, so, and they didn't really, that was kind of what I got out of the article. There's so many other things, and there's underlying reasons, you know, like honestly, one of the biggest, and I'm actually going to show this this graph to the people that are actually watching. I've been referencing this for many, many years, and I saw this in new construction. So if you're actually watching, you can actually see this graph, but this graph actually shows you the amount of new build property. So the single family homes that are newly being built, and we have to understand from 2000. So if you go back 20 years, from 2000 to 2006, we started building a 1.2 million new, you know, builds a year, and we went all the way up to 1.8 million a year. So you have to think, like, that is a lot of new inventory that got put on the market between 2000 and 2006, and we had this and we were overbuilt. We were completely overbuilt in 2006. I was in new construction. I saw it coming. I lived this. So this isn't just something I've seen on a graph and something I was an investor of. I lived this because this was my life. This was my livelihood. I was in new construction. I saw this happen, and I had to experience this massive drop. You know, so basically we went from 1.8 million in 2006 to 2008, less than 400,000. New builds happened in 2008. So to me, so like if you, I'm going to show the graph again, and I know for the people listening on the podcast, you can't see that. I apologize. But if you watch this on Facebook or if you watch this on YouTube, you'll be able to see the actual graph. But it went all the way down. So I think people are only looking at the number where we're at now. So we're basically back to 1.2. We just finally made it in 2020, 2021. There was a massive dip down in 2020, and it kind of has started to go, you know, creep back up right now. And, you know, there's a lot of new build community happening right now, even though lumber prices are ridiculously expensive, which I also think is feeding into the price, the overall price of even used houses is, you know, the lumber prices right now. But we have to think, for the last 10 years, so from 2009 until now, we started at 400,000, we went to 500,000, 600,000, 700,000, 800,000, 900,000, a million finally in 2019, and then now we went way back down to 600, about 500, about 600, maybe 700,000 in 2020, and then now we're back up. You know, we're looking for about 1.2 million in this year. So we're finally back to the point where we were in 2000. And for the last 10 years, like, we are missing millions of houses that should be built. So it's going to take some time. I think there's a lot of talk about bubble right now. And I think we're only comparing, like, the bubble we think we're experiencing right now, we're comparing 2010 to 2021. We're not comparing. We're not going back another 10 years. And I think it'd be very wise for most people to go back and compare 2000 to where we're at now. Because that's really where we're at when it comes to inventory in houses. So we're finally starting to, and we're not even there yet, because you have to understand, before 2000 we were building way more for those previous 5 years or 10 years than we have been for the previous 10 years now. So this has a lot to do. Single family housing starts are climbing, but there's still so much demand, and that we haven't been able to consume. Most markets around the country are less than a month's supply. And there's a rule as a realtor, most realtors know this, that a normal market is 3 months supply. So if there's 3 months supply on the market, that means that's a normal market. That means that this market's stable. That's not really a renter's market. It's not really a seller's market. It's kind of going to work both ways. It's going to help both people. When it's way more than 3 months supply, then we have a buyer's market. We have there's too many buyers. There's not enough sellers. But on the flip side, what we have today is way more buyers than we have inventory on the market. So again, those are key points of this article. The other thing that I wanted to note in the papers I got, I know you got a bunch, Jared, you probably want to go over as well, is and I kind of just mentioned it, and I kind of proved it by what I just talked about, but I think a lot of the talk lately has been the pandemic. The pandemic has caused this. The pandemic, I'm glad that this article even says why not, why it's not the root cause. The pandemic did accelerate those costs, and also on top of that, having schooling and having people work from home, it's made it more important to have a nice home and a nice living space. And us as Americans especially have said, hey, we want to have a nice place at home now. It matters more because we're spending more time in our home. And it also has reminded us of the importance of a home. We've seen it a lot even in our own portfolios, and everything that we're doing is that people that used to be fine living in condos or living in shared walls or living in apartments have really, there's been a massive shift and a turn towards living, having their own outside world, having their own safe space of shelter from the outside world, which was mentioned by this Zillow Group principal economist Chris Lynn. And so those are just some things that I pulled out of this article, Jared. There's so much more, and I know that you've got some as well. But those are, to me, I think we need to pay attention to what's going on, and we need to know, should I be a renter at this point? Should I be a landlord at this point? And why does it make sense for me to be a landlord today?
And just the fact that they're having that conversation, having that thought line, does kind of lend toward, how does that affect us as investors? And you had mentioned it before, just the whole thought line that we tend to be worried at some point when houses are appreciating, because we feel it's going to affect that break-even point of whether I should continue to buy. But where some guys would be bowing out at the higher price points because of the loan, the interest rates, and the fact that we're able to lock them in for 30 years, it really should kind of open that door. And if anything, it should give us the other avenue of say, hey, let's be aggressive today. While the going is good when it comes to interest rates, because now you can get a better property than you could have. Maybe out of pocket, you might be spending a little bit more out of pocket, but as far as the actual return, you're getting a better property too in some cases. So just an interesting, how that's translating.
The other thing that you mentioned this morning that you read was that it said in the article that home prices are raising faster than rents are.
Yeah.
So rents sometimes are a lagging thing. They kind of lag behind home prices. But what we have seen is that demand is so high that we got in front of this. Yeah. And I'm not sure everybody did. I think a lot of landlords, especially in some certain states where they're even still kind of locked down right now, to a certain degree, have been a little bit more fearful. Sure. Right? So I think all the more to understand that, hey, the rents that are today are going to go up. As home prices go up, the price of rents go up too. It's not an equilibrium. It's that they don't go up at equal rates, but they do go up over time. And what's going to happen when all these people have sold their houses? If that's what the article is mentioning, is when you sell your house, hey, you might end up renting in the future. What's going to happen? So to me, like, I want to look at those lagging things and take advantage of those lagging data points, because I know that they're lagging. I know that they're not going to stay that way. And again, like, I think it's hard for me to even talk through this, because I know in our market they're not lagging, and I know, like, for us, we got ahead of this, and I think most people aren't getting ahead of it. And I've even I've already mentioned on this podcast, I'm starting a new location, a new market in Pensacola, Florida, and I'm looking at down there saying, hey, rents haven't gone up yet.
Yeah.
Like, they've gone up a little bit, but they haven't even gone up anywhere near what they have here. Although the house prices have gone up, the same or maybe even a hair more than they have here. So I'm looking to that as to how can I take advantage of that? How can I maybe buy those houses that are rented for $900 a month now, and then turn around and rent them for a much higher price, rent them for $1,400, $1,500 like they should be, and then be able to take advantage of the value that's going to bring. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, and we really have seen as the appreciation has gone up. So when I'm going through talking to our clients about Gary, for instance, when we opened up Gary, we started selling turnkey product. We were selling a 3-bed, no basement, no garage, under 1,000 square feet, and we're selling it for about $55,000, and our rent was around $850. Again, phenomenal numbers. Well, today that house is probably selling for between $65,000 and $75,000, and now the rent's at $995, $950, $995. So it's gone up with it really pretty much the same.
And that's the low end market. That is the D plus, C minus.
Correct.
That's really that is definitely we're talking about D markets. We're talking about that. When you kind of get into the C markets, now we're looking at 90 to 110, where before those were maybe 70 to 80, and those now are renting most of the time well over $1,000. A lot of times they're renting for $950 to maybe $1,200, and then you kind of get to this next range where maybe now it's $120 to $150, and now those are renting for $1,300, $1,400 all the way up to maybe $1,600.
Right. And as a turnkey provider, when we're acquiring these deals, we need to project both the end price, but also the end rent. What's this house going to sell for, and what's this house going to rent for? And so when we're evaluating these deals, we have to make that decision sometimes 3 to 6 months ahead of time, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting because historically, you have seen more appreciation in the higher end markets and not the appreciation in the lower end markets. But what we're seeing now, because we haven't built in the lower end market, and we haven't built those cheap houses, so there's nowhere for those people to go. At some point, there's people and they can only afford so much. And this is what, I studied these markets from 1990s to all the way through the 2000s, and I read so many articles I could possibly get my hands on, and since 2017, 2016, when people said the market's going to crash in 2017, I said, no, it's not going to crash. It's not ready. There's no data supporting that. This is all just fear and somebody just trying to get up on a fence post and just get up on a soapbox and be the first person to call the crash, right? Yeah. And it's interesting because now we're in 2021, we're 4 years later, and some of those people are still saying it's going to crash. And it's almost like, if you say it's going to crash long enough, eventually it's going to, right?
You'll be right at one point.
At one point, at some point, you're going to be right. Yeah. So I think it's very important to study the markets, study what's really going on, study the emotions of the people that are even in the market, and then try to put the data along with the emotions into play and try to predict what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, we don't have a crystal ball. We are not God, so we can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. Sure. All we can do is kind of go from our own experience and be able to show you, this is where we're at. Now, do I think at some point we will have a crash? We will have some kind of market correction? Absolutely. At some point we're going to. This year, right now in 2021, it looks to me I hate to say it, you have this feeling like as soon as you say it's not going to crash this year, like you're never going to have anything, and that's when it happens, But the data doesn't show us it today. Mm-hmm. The data actually shows the exact opposite. The data shows us that we don't have enough supply, and and the demand is getting greater. Even the article, the article isn't meant to say that the demand for rent's going to go up. It's meant to say, well, you might be a renter, which to me tells me, hey, the demand for rentals is going to go up. And sometimes people just don't ever get their credit fixed.
Sure,
they're not trained. As a young person, I feel like that's people ask me things about my dad. Hey, what are the things that you remember about your dad that were the good things? And I think a lot of times we only love to focus on the bad things, the things we don't remember, we don't like about our parents. But I like to kind of just push those to the side and say, hey, what are the things that your dad really did that you really loved? And I can remember, and this is off topic, but I can still remember him coming home from working all day, and then playing catch with me. And I was a pitcher when in grade school, and I can remember him sitting next to a tree. And in hindsight, this was not a very good idea, but he would sit next to a tree, and the tree was like the batter, so I had to kind of pitch to the batter, and he would have his glove there, and I still remember the ball hitting the tree and hitting him in the face, and it was not a good thing for him. And we didn't do that anymore after that.
Sure.
But for really for a whole summer, he did that until that happened to him. But I can remember that, and I can also remember as a teenager him teaching me, hey, you need to be a homeowner, and this is how you buy a house. This is what debt to income ratio means. And those are things that really aren't being taught. Mm-hmm. And I mean, to me, like if you ask me what's the biggest reason for the rent demand, that's what it is. It's financial literacy in high school and kids, and really now we're coming up on a whole generation of people that have been renters. So now it's like their parents didn't know anything different. Me and you have a brother-in-law where his parents always rented. They had no idea about home ownership. Yeah. And it's just to me, obviously that's like a burden on me, because I feel like these kids and these young people need to know how to buy a house. But at the end of the day, we as landlords, this is why we have our business. This is why we can own rental properties, because most of America doesn't really know, and it's and I eventually down the road, even our property management company, we have talked about having education for even the renters. And you might say, oh no, don't do that, I want them to rent my property forever. But no, at the end of the day, we do want this to be a good thing for the community. And I believe that by bringing in more homeowners, and they're going to be better renters. They will understand, this is how you take care of your property. This is what you have to do. Because I believe home ownership's not just all about the payment. It's about also understanding what it means to be a homeowner as well. So any other things about the article, Jared? I know we've already gone quite a bit here, but we definitely have more time if you have some more things on your pages over there that you wanted to point out about this article or anything else.
Sure. You just mentioned it, so it's really interesting. Tom's right. You have some renters that'll be renters, and in some cases they're okay with that. Some cases there's the fear, they just don't know. And so, but you also have, again, according to this article, now you have this new wave of people where now it's strategic. Now they're renting, and they may actually have a good job, or maybe they have good credit, but now they're renting. And so you almost have this kind of scenario where you have flexibility that's being brought up. I'm just better off not having paying this high-end price point, right? Or maybe they can't. Or something I commonly hear is, hey, I like to have somebody who, when something breaks down at night, I don't have to fix it. I can make a call, and the landlord's got to take care of it. The property manager's going to come and fix it. So you have this, flexibility. They're not tied down to a property versus control. So that's one word he used in the article that's very helpful for the owner is while the tenant has that flexibility and the ability to move and do different things, the owner of the property, the landlord, has control. Now the only caveat to that is a situation where you may have a moratorium or something like that kind of gets in the way, and that's just a whole other conversation. But
that's another podcast, Jared.
Yeah, it is. And but I found it really interesting from that perspective, is you have this kind of the pros and cons to why a tenant would a prospective tenant would want to rent or own, and all the different things, and how that's seemingly the possibility to add to this pool already of what we have. And so being an owner, being able to provide that in a time where, like we talked about inventory, where now we're just right at where we were 20 years ago at building, and we would say today that if the demand is 1 month, then it's a good time to be an owner, because you have people need to rent, and especially in Northwest Indiana where people are flooding outside of Chicago, inventory is a big deal in Northwest Indiana today. So it's definitely something. If you own in Northwest Indiana, it's good. If you're looking, it's a good place. On top of just the market altogether.
Yeah, there's. I think I kind of already mentioned this already, but there's one thing that the article doesn't really mention because it's not really written to landlord. It's not really written, in that light. It basically just says, hey, if you sell your house this year, you might get more money than you think, and you might become a tenant down the road. But it does not. What it doesn't mention is that there are different markets. Right? And right. I think most people that are listening to this are very well educated. We have the most educated audience on the air, right, Jared?
Oh, sure.
Yes,
well, now
our audience is well educated. But so, and you guys know that, but I just want to point it out that there are markets where it probably would make more sense to be a tenant or a renter than it would make to be a landlord or to own your own property if you're living in it yourself. So, for me, when I'm going out and I'm looking at markets for me to buy in myself, or I'm looking at markets for me to be able to bring to my investors, I'm looking at those markets where those markets where it still makes sense to own the property, and it doesn't, and not to necessarily just buy on appreciation. Where can I still get cash flow? Where can I still? And to me, cash flow is about what helps hold it all together. A lot of what the article is talking about is appreciation and all that piece. And I think, I think appreciation has to come into the conversation. There has to be part of this that we do talk about for appreciation. But on the flip side, like, you still want the whole deal to be held together. And the way it holds everything together every single month is that cash flow that you get from the properties. And so I think, paying very close attention to which markets does it make sense today, and which markets is it going to make sense in the future. And I've said this many, many times. I'm even writing a letter right now that it should be hitting people's, doorsteps, maybe while you're listening to this podcast, if you're one of our investors, or you've already gotten it, or you'll be getting it probably in the next week from the time you hear this podcast. And what I'm doing with my own personal portfolio, and when I look at this from like, hey, what would I do? Right? Like, I've seen the market. I know what's going on. I'm living the market. I'm not just seeing the market, right, Jared? Like, we are in the market. We see it every single day. We're buying houses every week. We're selling houses every week. And we are living this market, not only just here, but also in Pensacola, Florida as well. And, so we're looking at this and we're saying, hey, like, what are we going to do? And, so the stance that I have made, personally, is, hey, if my house is appreciated to the point where now it's worth $200,000. We talked a lot about this $50,000. Those houses haven't appreciated yet. Now, I think that word "yet" is a key word. That they have not appreciated yet to $200,000. I believe they probably will. And I know that that's crazy talk for some people that think, oh, there's no way a house in Etna or Gary, Indiana is going to be worth $200,000. I'm just predicting I believe it's going to. And for those properties, for myself personally, I'm considering, okay, those ones let's just keep. Let's just push the rents. Let's keep them as nice as I can possibly keep them. Let's make them, let's get happy tenants. Let's continue to help the community, but I'm going to hold those. But the properties that I've already seen appreciate up to that $200,000 mark and beyond, those are the ones that I am selling right now, and personally, and I'm even recommending that other people do at some point. Like, there's a point in time where when you have $100,000 in equity in a house and it's already worth $200,000, it just makes more sense to sell, and then at that point you can go buy way more. You can go buy more cash flow, basically, even from that same, $100,000. You can go buy 4 more houses or 5 more houses at that point, and you just start multiplying, what you've done. So, doing that a couple times, like you get in a couple market cycles where you have sold some of those. And do I still think that there's room for appreciation on the $200,000 houses? I actually do, and I don't really see it slowing up right now. It's going to slow up at some point. I just don't see it slowing up right now. And there's many reasons for that. We can get into the dollar. We can get into many other reasons that we don't have time for on this podcast. But for me, I think it's a whole lot more likely for a $100,000 house today to be worth $200,000 in a couple of years than it is for a $200,000 house to be worth $400,000 in a couple of years. That's just my opinion. That's how I've run my portfolio, and that's what I'm recommending for most people as well. So the result of all this is, hey, there's going to be more renters. Right? Which means there's going to be demand for rental properties. And I think that this is a great time to own rentals. We do have a podcast that's coming up shortly as well, talking about the referendums that may be off the line at some point, hint, for the next podcast here. But that's kind of my take on the whole thing.
We appreciate you joining us. Don't forget, we do also build rental portfolios for investors. So if you're interested in adding to your portfolio, you want to move into a new market, and you really have heard a lot of good things about Gary, you could reach out to us. You could reach to me at jared@buyolsongroup.com. That's my email. Or you can just go to our website, buyolsongroup.com. We have a new website. You can get on there. You can get on our list. You can also set an appointment to have a call with me where we can discuss how you can get into this area and how you can start investing with us. And we also, again, we'd love to get feedback on our podcast. So if you can give us some likes or shares or some five-star reviews, thumbs up.
We haven't been pushing that lately. But
yes. Yeah, so please don't hesitate.
We've been getting a lot of text messages, though, so we really do appreciate you guys text messaging us and letting us know how much you guys like the podcast. It does encourage us. There's sometimes we're like, oh, do we want to keep this going and keep pushing it?
Sure.
And sometimes it just gives us just a little bit of encouragement, enough to get back in the studio and do some more podcasts. But we do have some more coming at you. We have some good ideas for some podcasts coming up in the future.
Yeah, we certainly want to know that what we're discussing is bringing value, and so if you think that
and entertainment,
sure,
yes,
of course, and that's the real thing, a platform for us to tell jokes. So yeah, if this has brought value, please do, and then let us know. We'd appreciate it. And that's all we have for today, right?
I think so, Jared.
All right, cool.
Active Turnkey,
the best way to buy rentals.
Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olson Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.